I want to welcome you all and say good evening. You are here joining us for the Greater Egypt Long Range Transportation Plan virtual public meeting number 1. This is our evening meeting, the second of 2 that took place today. Our first meeting was at noon. Just to kick it off a little bit, want to go over today's agenda. We will be doing a little welcome and introductions to let you know who you're going to be hearing from and what roles we represent. Our team will go over the project scope so you have an understanding of what kind of work we are in the middle of right now. We're going to share with you some fast facts about the region, some things you may not know and some things that you may find interesting, and then review with you the vision and goals. Finally, we're going to wrap it up with how you can get involved in this process and the next steps of what you can expect in the coming months in relation to the Long Range Transportation Plan. So I want to start us off by turning it over to Joe Z of Greater Egypt Regional Planning and Development Commission to introduce himself and his team. And Joe, you may be on mute.
Yes, I was on mute, not mute. Thanks, Katie. So Joe Zdenkiewicz, I'm the Director of Transportation Planning at the Southern Illinois MPO. I also work on transportation projects for the Greater Egypt Planning Commission. I've been doing that since 2015. And prior to that, I was at IDOT District 9 for most of my career. I was there from 1985 to 2015. And what this effort is all about, and I know it's hard at times to get folks excited about planning. We want to get excited when projects are funded and going on to construction. But the grants that we apply for through Greater Egypt and through the MPO are very competitive, and so we're competing against communities that oftentimes have more resources than we do. And a lot of these planning activities go a long way to helping score highly on those grant applications. So in some cases it's required, in some cases maybe it's not required, but it still can affect your score. And one thing that we've learned with the creation of the Southern Illinois MPO in 2010, which the MPO funding provides resources for a lot of those planning activities, is we've really seen an increase in our ability to have successful grant applications in the MPO. And that's a direct result of the planning activities that we can fund through the dollars that the MPO gets. So just in the last few years, we've been able to obtain $11 million in ITEP funding. That's for pedestrian and bikeway improvements primarily for the communities in the MPO. We've obtained $5.5 million in safety funding for safety roadway projects for communities in the MPO. And we've also obtained over $10 million in safety funding for local agencies within the Greater Egypt region. And for that last study, we tapped into IDOT planning and research funds, which is very similar to the funding that we receive annually in the MPO and can be used for the same purposes. So basically, we want to take the success that we've seen in the MPO and expand it out to all the Greater Egypt region. And our goal really is to help the local communities achieve their goals for their transportation system. So we're not, it's not our goal to tell everyone what to do. Our goal is to help you achieve what you want to do and what you see that your needs are. And the first step in all of this is this long range transportation plan for the Greater Egypt region. And that will be kind of the launching pad for us to have more of a formalized cooperative and coordinated effort with our rural planning partners in the Greater Egypt region.
Thank you for that, Joe. We're going to now turn it over. We're going to talk a little bit about our project team so you know who you'll be hearing from this evening. My name is Katie Chackleford. I am the project manager for this long range transportation plan. I have been a certified planner and a professional transportation planner. That's what those letters behind my name means. Been doing this for about 10 years. I spent my first 5 years working in the public sector and have since become a consultant. One of the things that I like to share is that this will be probably my sixth long-range transportation plan. And what I love to see are these projects that move from ideas to implementation. So this is what we pride ourselves on, and making sure that your vision comes to life. Helping us with this effort are a number of firms. So we're also, I work for Lockmuller Group. We are working alongside I-5, the I-5 Group, and Clarita Ziegler Engineering out of Southern Illinois. So the three of us combined are your project team. My deputy project manager is Dustin Reichman, and I'll have him introduce himself.
Hey, good evening. Yep, Dustin here. I've been in this game about 20 years. So my initials mean professional engineer and professional traffic operations engineer. So I come more from the traffic side of things, less so from the planning, but I've done a lot of planning work, and in fact, helped Josie and Simpo with their very first long-range transportation plan in 2012. And 2015 with some updates to that. So had a lot of history in the region, really love working in this 5-county region. I live just outside of it myself in Madison County, and have lived in Southern Illinois my entire life. So very excited to be working alongside Katie and the rest of the project team. Stephen?
Good evening, Stephen Ivandahl. I'm the principal of the I-5 Group. We're a community planning firm. We're assisting the team with community engagement. As you may see, our firm and name associated with some of the marketing materials for some of the outreach. Also a native of Southern Illinois, grew up on a family farm in Washington County near the Perry County border.
Excellent. Well, thank you all, and thanks to my team members for joining us tonight. You'll be hearing from each of us a little bit later in the presentation. Just want to remind you guys, the purpose of today's meeting are kind of these 4 bullet points here. So we want to discuss and educate about what is the long-range transportation plan and what does this process look like. We want to go over some community transportation needs and gather information from you. We want to review and rank the long-range transportation plan goals, which are also going to be something you'll see if you take the public survey. And then we want to gather your ideas about the future of transportation in the region. And Josie said it really well. This plan is meant to be a plan for your communities and a plan for your region. It is not our needs or our wishes imposed. I apologize. I hear that my audio is breaking up. And I hope you guys don't mind. We're going to try and power through this. If not, what will happen is I'm going to log off and return in about 2 minutes. To correct my audio error. However, just to get through this last moment, to let you know, we're gathering ideas about the future of the region. We also want you to know that you are the experts of this region. We may be transportation experts, but you are the experts in your community. And so your input is incredibly valuable. I'm going to hand it over to Dustin. I'll disappear for a minute, and I hopefully will be back without any garbled voices.
Hopefully I sound less like a robot than Katie. So yeah, we're just going to walk through real quick, kind of an overview of what the overall study is. We're going to be asking for your input tonight and throughout this process. So I think it's really helpful to kind of know, where is this going to, what's the end game here. So we've kind of alluded to it, but if you're not familiar with the term Greater Egypt as it pertains to this specific organization, it's basically a planning organization for 5 counties. So Jefferson, Perry, Franklin, Jackson, and Williamson. And Josie talked a lot about Simpo, the Southern Illinois MPO, and that's basically everything that's in that hatched out area between Marion and Carbondale. So in 2010, the census said those 2 major metropolitan pieces grew together at Crab Orchard Lake. They became an MPO. They became an urbanized area, which required an MPO, a metropolitan planning organization. So our study area is basically everything in the 5 counties except for Simpo, because they have their own planning process for that location. Basically, we're looking at all forms of transportation. So I know, when I say transportation, my mind immediately thinks of cars and trucks, but we're looking a lot more universal than that. So we're looking at things like transit, multimodal, bike, ped, not only freight rail, but also passenger rail. We have Amtrak going through the region, and air transportation as well. And kind of where all this will culminate is in a prioritized project list. So this isn't just planning for the sake of planning at all. It's very much like we will have a list of projects that we think should be implemented based largely on your input and our technical analysis. And we will look for funding sources to fund each of those. And we'll basically, have a plan for how we will spend money as we get money. And this plan will help get more money. That's kind of one of the big points of it. So the actual deliverable, what we're going to be working on, the document itself, the existing conditions you see listed there as bullet points. I think one thing that may strike you and maybe it's a little surprising is it's not just, there's one bullet that says transportation, right? It's almost all other stuff. And that's because transportation affects all aspects of our lives. Really, our entire quality of life is in some way affected by transportation and projects around transportation. So we're looking at things like demographics and employment and emerging industries. How will land be used now? How will the environment be impacted? And what does the future look like? That's a big part of what we're going to be doing. And everything we do involves safety. So safety is going to be baked in no matter what. So it's definitely one component of the plan. So we have the future conditions. And then that last bullet point, it kind of goes back to what I just said. This will be a financial and fiscally constrained plan. Obviously things change over time, but the idea is to have a baseline to say this was the community's priorities. This is the technical needs based on all the analysis that we do and all the input that we gather. And we want to have a plan to implement stuff. That's what makes an effective plan effective versus just a plan that sits on a shelf somewhere. So this is our overall schedule. We basically started the beginning of 2021. You can see we're almost halfway through the process. The purple bar up top basically shows we've been doing public involvement for quite a while now, and we will continue up until the very end of the process. Tonight's our first virtual public meeting that's kind of a larger scale. We're going to talk about some surveys and some broader input, but we've had numerous meetings with different stakeholders and steering committee people and experts and leaders within the region for sure to get input to this point. So you can see in the blue, we're almost at the tail end of all the existing conditions, those different points I just went over a second ago about all the things that affect our lives. We're moving into the red, and the red is pretty exciting because that's the future. That's looking forward to what's the vision, what are the goals, what are some scenarios that we should be looking at planning out, and specifically identifying what are the needs for transportation infrastructure in our study area. And then the green will be the final phase. That's the documentation. That's where you'll have a draft to respond to and say, hey, you took my input and I do or don't agree with certain aspects of it, and I think it should be tweaked in certain ways. So before we talk specifically about this region and the things that we found out and the things we want your input on, just to give a real quick overview of kind of what makes transportation in a rural area different than say an urban area, and what is a long range transportation plan for. So, those of us that have lived in rural areas, and you guys either live, work, play in a rural area, if you're in that 5-county region outside of SIMPO, we all play a critical role in the nation's economy. I think we don't get enough credit in some cases for how big of an impact rural areas have, but rural transportation specifically has a huge impact on the economy. So in your area specifically, agriculture, mining, and energy are huge. It has a direct effect on the quality of life of all Americans. And 2/3 of all rail freight originates in urban areas, and nearly half of all truck freight miles are in rural areas, meaning half the miles traveled by trucks happen in rural areas, not just in urban areas. It's again, we may think about those major metropolitan areas as the generators. And something that, maybe a fun fact if you're not in transportation, but you're out in the country and you drive over 2-lane roads all the time, and they have bridges, and they typically have a posted weight limit on them. That posted weight limit doesn't mean a lot to us driving around in a pickup truck or a car, but if you're in a grain truck or of course larger semi trucks, that's a major deal because many of those are posted with weights that are less than than those drivers can traverse, which basically creates a lot of detours, a lot of adverse travel. So when we don't have good infrastructure, we don't have adequate bridges throughout a rural transportation network, we basically get triple the amount of truck travel to get from point A to point B. So that's a significant point of constraint in our economy. And again, some kind of interesting statistics as again, those of you that live in rural areas, so there's only 19% of all Americans live in a rural area, which is kind of crazy when you look at a map and see how much is rural versus urban, but it's, obviously it's much less densely populated. However, 68% of our road lane miles are in those same rural areas. So basically we have 19% of people using and paying for in large part and supporting and maintaining 68% of the roads. So there's a huge, disparate, comparison there in those two numbers. Similarly, on the safety side, 45% of our fatalities on roadways happen in rural roads. Again, only 19% of the population using them. So there's obviously some issues there, which kind of shows up in that bottom bullet point when you do the math. And 34% of highway railway crashes. So basically cars getting hit by trains at crossings happen in rural areas. That may be a little more intuitive. But the bottom line here is that the reality that we face is that the fatality rate, the number of people that die per vehicle mile traveled on rural roads is twice as high as urban roads. So we have a lot of work to do. We have a large responsibility when it comes to safety. And the good news is there's a lot of upside here, and there's a lot of good that can be done with wise planning. So the final point here is just to compare LRTPs. So long range transportation plan is the mouthful that we always abbreviate LRTP. In the urbanized areas throughout the United States, there are many, many, many of them, dozens for sure, maybe hundreds. Anything over a 50,000 population has to be in an MPO, a metropolitan planning organization. It's a federal rule. So SIMPO is one of those organizations. And you can see a little more fine detail there on the bottom. The yellow is what SIMPO encompasses. So it's basically Marion to Carbondale, Carterville in between. It goes up and grabs Heron. It's kind of all that what you might think of as this, where a lot of the housing is in the two counties of Jackson and Williamson. So again, that happened in 2010. They now do planning in this MPO way that they're required to do. And every 5 years, they have to update their financial or their long range plan. They have to have a fiscally constrained plan, meaning they have to show exactly when they get dollars, how they plan to spend them, and then they can amend that in time as priorities come up. So this isn't just SIMPO, though. This is, again, throughout the whole United States, but it's happening right in your backyard in SIMPO. Big distinction is they have to do it, and there's a mandated process. It's the only way to get the federal funding to then distribute to all these communities. In a rural area like what we're studying in the rest of the 5-county region, you don't have to do an LRTP, but we're choosing to do one, right? So Greater Egypt has had the foresight to say, we should do this. We don't have to, but it's going to put us ahead of most of the rest of the state and a lot of the country, because we can be, a standard bearer as far as what rural transportation organizations could be, and basically leverage this whole planning effort and this collaboration and getting the communities to work together to get way outsized results as far as funding goes. And SIMPO is pretty young, but Joe already established and kind of has the proof in the pudding of the amount of money that they've been able to bring into the region to build stuff and to build really good projects in multimodal, safety, and other areas. So that's really the idea here. In our 5 counties, let's do the same, but it starts with this document. It starts with this process. So we're really happy that you're helping us to kick it off in a wise way.
All right. We're not sure how my mic's going to work. So
Sound better.
That's good. To make sure it lasts, though, we're going to pivot just a little bit. So our man behind the curtain, Peter Williams, he is another planner with our team. I'm going to let him introduce himself. He's going to go through our fast facts. He's also been driving the presentation behind the scenes, so this is his time to shine. Thanks, Peter, and I'll let you introduce yourself.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Peter Williams. I'm a professional planner. I work with Katie for Locking Group. And like she said, because of the technical difficulties she's having with her audio, I'm going to discuss some of the fast facts that we've learned as we've been completing the first part of the long-range transportation plan, the existing conditions. So one of the primary things that we look at first off is the demographic profile. And we do this because it affects the transportation system in a number of different ways, particularly different groups may have different transportation needs or may use the transportation system in different ways. So the graphic here on the left talks a little bit about what type of people we have living in the region. So we have, in the whole 5-county region, we have a little over 223,000 people. So a lot more than you might think, especially for a rural area, but that just encapsulates the large geographic area that we're discussing. Almost 13% non-white, which is about the same as the state average, maybe a little bit lower. 15% of the population has a disability. That's actually higher than the state average. And again, that people with a disability certainly have different transportation needs than people without a disability. And same goes for people who live in poverty. Poverty rate in Greater Egypt is almost 19%, which is a little bit higher than the state average as well. On the right-hand side, we have what's called an age mix graph or a pyramid. And you can kind of see you have large groups represented in the 25 to 60-year-old age groups, which is fairly typical. What's a little bit interesting about Greater Egypt is the blue triangle that's kind of superimposed on top. And, or excuse me, the blue triangle is what a typical age pyramid would look like, with large numbers of younger people and lower numbers of people as they age. Greater Egypt doesn't quite fit that because of the baby boom generation. So you see this wider group here in the middle. And as those groups age, they're going to have different transportation needs as well. So that must be taken into consideration as well as we think about planning for the next 5 years, 10 years, and further in the future. So next we look at things like land use, the environment, and you might be, how does transportation affect these types of things? And transportation, I think, as Dustin kind of alluded to in his part of the presentation, really affects about all aspects of our life. And we talk about transportation infrastructure, we have to be cognizant of the environment and the land uses that necessitate certain types of travel. So on the left-hand side here, we've analyzed the different types of land cover. Common to a lot of rural areas, cultivated crops take up almost 35% of the land cover. That's unsurprising. Another 26% of the land cover is deciduous forest, and another 17% is hay and pasture. So we're not talking about an area that is highly developed. Particularly interesting for Greater Egypt is the amount of protected land in terms of parks and national parks and preserves, things like that. We've calculated 250 square miles of protected land, which is really special to the area, and it helps improve quality of life. It helps attract people to the area, and it's one of those things that we want to keep in mind as we think about how we want our transportation infrastructure investments to make sure that that land is protected. And then one key thing that we found when we were just thinking about water quality and how the transportation system may impact water quality is that 85% of the water bodies that have been assessed are actually impaired already. And so that's just something that we also need to consider as we look towards the future and how additional transportation infrastructure investments may adversely impact the water quality in the area. As we talk about Greater Egypt, we're talking actually about 47 total incorporated areas. On the screen here is the top 5 in terms of population, not to discount any of the smaller ones, but these are where a large percentage of the people live in rural areas. Mount Vernon, Frankfurt, Point, Pickneyville. So there's a lot of players involved, people from a lot of different towns, representatives from a lot of different towns. They all must be consulted and cooperate in order to have a successful plan. I'll briefly talk about the education and employment. A little over 100,000 people in the labor force. Labor force participation ranges anywhere from 55% when you talk about the entire population, including those over 65, so people who are retired. When you take those folks out, labor force participation increases to about 75%. Both of those numbers are actually a little bit lower than the state average. Unemployment rate is 6.8%, again, slightly higher than the state average. And the median income is $45,000, a little over $45,000. But when you consider the low cost of living, that gets you quite a bit compared to other parts of the state, certainly other parts of the country. And then on the right-hand side, we see the breakdown in terms of education. Lots of folks, compared to the state of Illinois, have started college but have not finished it, and then certainly lower percentage of folks with a bachelor's degree and a postgraduate degree. And that is important because the type of education that one has dictates the type of job that that person may have, the types of industries that locate in the area, dictate the needs of the need for transportation. So this is just a further illustration of that, types of industries that we have in the region. And this graph here compares Greater Egypt to the state of Illinois, just like the previous one did. So we're outperforming the state of Illinois in terms of educational services and retail and agriculture. We're close on manufacturing and construction, and we're a little bit lower than the state of Illinois in industries regarding information, finance, professional, and scientific. So as is typical, most people in the region commute by car. The average commute time is 22 minutes, which is a little bit less than the state and national average. Only 1% commute via transit, but almost 3.5% don't have a vehicle at home. So the other 2% who don't have a vehicle at home, who also don't take transit, are left to find other methods of getting to work, which may be particularly challenging in a rural area where that 22 minutes might be less than the state national average, but they might be traveling a much further distance. So a little bit about the transportation infrastructure. Two main interstates, I-64 and I-57, along with one US route and 8 state routes. So we see the map here on the right-hand side with some of those labeled as well as symbolized or colored based on the volume. So you see I-57 and I-64 are going to have the highest amounts of volume, as well as some of the state routes in US 51 there. To further elaborate on the transportation system characteristics, a little over 9,000 total lane miles. 71% of those lane miles, though, are classified as local roads. The reason this number is important is because local roads are not eligible for federal funding. So 71% of the lane miles, 6,600 lane miles total, are left to local and state funding. Only 29% are classified as collector or above, and therefore eligible for federal funding. Again, this is hammering home Dustin's point about how in rural areas oftentimes are overburdened with the transportation system requirements. Moving on to walking and biking. As tastes and preferences change, and as particularly with COVID-19, it seems like there's a greater interest in being outside and being active. Certainly, active forms of transportation, walking, biking, are gaining interest. So currently, we have the Wren Lake Bike Trail, which is over 20 miles of a bike trail around Wren Lake. And Perkins Avenue bike lane in Mount Vernon, and another bike lane in Mount Vernon, totaling about 22 miles, or a little bit more than that actually, in the region. That's in addition to approximately 8 miles, I think, of hiking trails. And then for being a rural area, transit is particularly important, especially for those who don't have access to a vehicle, as we saw on the previous slide before. There are 3 main bus mass transit districts: the Jackson County Mass Transit District, Rides Mass Transit, and South Central Illinois Mass Transit. Together, you're looking at over 1.5 million annual trips. And you also have Amtrak, which has almost 37,000 annual trips out of Carbondale. Somewhat related to the freight or the rail transportation is the freight network. And I-64 and I-57 in the region constitute 90 miles that are within the national freight network. And the importance of that is their connectivity to additional major freight hubs, particularly St. Louis and Memphis and Chicago. 4 of the 7 Class 1 railroads exist in the region. Almost 600 miles of Class 1 railroad exist. And again, these are railroads that connect major rail hubs in St. Louis, Memphis, and Chicago. And then your short line railroads are going to be ones that are providing access to the more and the ones that aren't served by the major Class 1 railroads. Short lines really provide economic benefit to the rural areas, the shippers who don't have such high revenue. And the main one operating area is Western, right around 40 miles. So Dustin mentioned how safety is a particularly important part of an LRTP. So we have a couple different transportation maps here that will show you. This first one here is identifying the locations throughout the area where crashes are occurring at high frequencies. Typically, this is going to be correlated with either population and or traffic, lots of traffic volume. And you kind of see that the hotspots here, colored in the dark red, are in this area for the most part, but you also see some in Mount Vernon, Benton, and West Frankfort. What more interesting though is the high severity crash clusters. And so these hotspots, also colored in red, are locations where not necessarily we're seeing the highest number of crashes, we're seeing crashes where people are hurt. So we've identified possibly the top 5 of those. You have in Jefferson County, East South Street and North and Main Street. Perry County, you have US 51 and North Hickory Street, as well as State Route 154 and County Line Road. Franklin County, you have 1800 East, 1550 North Union Road. And in Jackson County, US 51. Also interesting though is the cold spots listed in this map. It's there in West Frankfort along I-57. And a cold spot is, whereas a hot spot is indicating locations where lots of people are getting hurt in crashes. Cold spot is representing where there's lots of crashes, but very few people are getting hurt. So this is interesting because it still tells us that there's something happening there in that location that's causing crashes. Probably should exist.
All right, I just want to give a big kudos to Peter for jumping in and helping with that. Now we're going to take it. Oh, I'm going to need to become a co-host again now that I'm back. We're going to take a moment to do another poll. And as soon as I get sharing capabilities, I will kickstart that poll so you guys can log in. All right. So question 2 of our poll for tonight is, what is the biggest transportation issue in your community? If you have not already, I ask that you go to the website pollev.com/Greater Egypt. Oh my goodness, all right, pollev.com/Greater Egypt, or you can text Greater Egypt, no space, to the number 22333. Once you've done that, you can join and you can submit your responses via text message. What we're going to do is keep this live for a few moments. While we do that, we're going to answer a couple of questions. Are there any questions right now in the chat box? Well, I'll trust my team. I'm not hearing any at the moment. As we can see, lack of on-demand mass transit. These are great. We anticipate some great responses here. So while your responses are coming in, I just want to turn the questions over to Joe Z. So Joe, you've been working in transportation in Southern Illinois for a long time. Quick question for you. What is the biggest change you've seen in your time in the last, in serving in the region? What's the biggest positive change you've seen in the Greater Egypt region over the past 5-10 years? Oh, Joe wants to unmute.
I had to unmute there. Well, the thing that comes first to mind is the the creation of the MPO. And, you know, there were some growing pains associated with having a new transportation body that the locals had to coordinate with. But we've really been able to leverage that funding into a lot of dollars for the region. And, you know, it took us a few years to really fine tune our processes and where we put those planning dollars to work. But we've really been able to use those really effectively in the last few years. And of course, you know, we've already said it, but we want to expand that, you know, outside the borders of the MPO to all the Greater Egypt region.
Great, thanks. And good to hear. We know you may be shy, so for those of you who have not yet sent in your responses, that's okay. We do have a survey that Stephen will be talking about later this presentation. I also want to let you know the responses here are going to be combined with the responses from our lunchtime session. So your responses will be encapsulated as far as this plan goes, and they're going to help guide us and direct us as we move forward into future transportation concerns. So we're going to move off of this question to our second question, which is, what is your biggest safety concern when traveling in your community? Just an example, some of the things we heard earlier today included an abundance of deer, and that is not something unheard of in a rural area. Deer can be, and in some places are, the biggest cause of crashes. Another thing we heard were that narrow roadways and flooding were some of the issues that that the communities are facing in Greater Egypt. So what we want to ask, what is your biggest safety concern when you're traveling in your community? We will be combining your responses with the feedback from earlier today to help guide our process as we move forward. And while we're waiting for some responses on this question, I will turn it over to Dustin. Dustin, you've worked in the Greater Egypt region for many years. What is the most exciting project you've seen come to fruition?
I'll pick one that I wasn't directly involved in, and that would be the Crab Orchard Trail project. And you know, I mentioned earlier, I live in Madison County. I'm very spoiled. We had a huge Rails to Trails initiative, I guess, coming out of like the 80s and 90s, where the local transit agency here had the foresight to basically acquire the rights to be on top of a lot of railroad right-of-ways, as those were no longer needed. And so we enjoy 120 miles of bike trails. So I know that we're very spoiled, but we heard in our earlier session that in scenic areas and wonderful, you know, recreational areas like the Greater Egypt area, there's a huge demand for that, you know, from the local populace as well as visitors. And so I think that's kind of the first real demonstration project that not only is there a need for it and we're willing to spend money on it, but that we can actually collaborate to make it work across communities. And I think that's what's really cool about that project. It's basically a collaboration between, and joke, and I'll miss some agencies, but I know it's, you know, Marion, Carbondale, Carterville, Crab Orchard, Nature Preserve, IDOT. I know I think there's federal funding. So there's a lot of, and SIMPO obviously helping to lead the charge, and consultants to help make it work too. So there's a lot of people coming together and saying there's lots of things, lots of priorities that we need to spend money on. But we think that connecting these communities along the spine of Route 13, but in a multimodal bike ped friendly way, is one of those priorities. And to see that actually happening is, I'd say that's probably my favorite right now.
That's great to hear. Thanks for sharing. Well, looks like we have a shy crowd tonight. So we will close our poll and, oh, wait, we've got an answer. Other drivers in the middle of country roads instead of staying on their side. That is a really good point, and that is usually an indication that people feel unsafe or that the shoulders are narrow. So thanks for bringing that to our attention. We will definitely record your responses and include them for the future. For now, we're going to end our polling session and we'll move back. Peter will be once again driving the bus as far as the presentation goes, and we'll continue with our next few slides. All right. The last thing we want to go through for the end of our meeting is to discuss our vision and goals with you. So as Dustin mentioned earlier in this process, this is not the first time we've started public engagement. This has been a process that we began many months ago. We started out with 2 regional leaders roundtables, and those leaders roundtables were done in July. We used an exercise called a SWOT analysis, which looks at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats to evaluate the region, what's helping and hurting us now and possibly in the future. So we used that exercise to help guide us. And then in August, we met with our steering committee. So the Regional Leaders Roundtable was made up of a number of elected and appointed officials and those people that have real influence over the region. Following that, we went to our steering committee, which was comprised of a lot of technical experts. And those technical experts and subject matter experts were those who helped us refine this and address any specific needs that their expertise came in handy for. And so what we did was we established a vision and goals. We had those reviewed and evaluated by the steering committee, and now we're bringing them to you for consideration. We've also used our time to consult with staff and county engineers to make sure that they're in line with the staff needs of Greater Egypt as well as those of the local communities. So we've used all that input now to guide what you're about to see. So we start off with a vision, and this vision is maybe not what we know Greater Egypt as today, but it is what we hope Greater Egypt to be in the future. And many of these aspects are things that you already feel or know about your community. But the vision for this plan that's going to guide our process is called it says the Greater Egypt region will be known as a land of opportunity, a strong region with a vibrant economy, a pristine natural environment that makes it a choice destination to live, grow, and prosper. So with that in mind, we open up the comments and questions. If you would like to make any changes or recommendations to this vision, or if you feel like it doesn't align with what you imagine Greater Egypt to be in the future, please let us know. With that in mind, we're going to move over to our goals. So we have drafted a number of goals based on that feedback from the vision and the exercises we did previously. These are goals that we hope to achieve that will help us reach that vision in the future. These goals are in no particular order. The first in this list is to increase transportation safety, and then increase access to opportunities. And when we mean access to opportunities, that's opportunities to do things, to find work, to enjoy life. So opportunities is a very broad, to get an education. All those things are considered opportunities. The third listed is increase the quality of life. The fourth, increase financial sustainability. And so when we talk about financial sustainability, that goal is related to local governments and local agencies, their ability to support and maintain the infrastructure that they have and the work that they do. Then we talk about the support of active, healthy living. That's obviously something that in a region so full of vibrant wildlife and places to go, the ability to go outside and enjoy that is really important. To preserve natural resources is another goal we've identified. And then finally, to increase economic resilience. And when we talk about economic resilience, the difference between that and financial sustainability is that economic resilience relates to your personal family, your business, your way of living. It's your own personal financial situation. So we want to make sure people in the region are economically resilient and ready for whatever comes. We were going to pivot now and do another exercise where we allow you to rank those goals, but we're actually going to skip over that tonight since we have a shy crowd. You will be able to rank these goals as part of the public survey, which is ongoing right now. And that gives us a great opportunity to transition over to Stephen, who's going to talk about how you can get involved and share your ideas on this process.
Well, thanks, Katie. Getting involved is a very important part of the overall transportation plan process. The challenge is with the 5-county area, we often don't think about getting involved in kind of a regional sense. And as Joe mentioned earlier, when we hear the words, long range transportation plan, again, sometimes it's not very exciting in terms of getting involved. But we do want to make sure we have a process that allows the public to be involved and provide input into this process. So why does engagement matter? And you see on your screen, several reasons. The one I really want to highlight is number two. It really starts to create more effective solutions that, with your input, it really helps the planning team, identify things that we may miss as a planning team. As Katie mentioned, there's been a leadership roundtable in July with the regional leaders from the 5 counties. We also have a great steering committee, again, with representatives from the 5 counties, also different representing different modes of transportation. We talked a lot tonight about vehicular and a little bit about transit. We also have representatives on the steering committee representing the airports in the 5 county region and other modes. So, with their help, we've identified a lot of key issues and important issues, but really we're still going to miss things. So really your input in terms of helping identify priorities and helping identify actually specific potential projects is going to be critical. So the hub for engagement is we have a dedicated website for the plan, Greater Egypt transportationplan.org. If you registered for this webinar, I'm sure you've seen it. It's really the hub of information. So throughout the planning process, we'll be putting information about the plan on the website, documents. We want to be very transparent, throughout this work. So if you know someone who may have wished to attend the meeting tonight or the one at noon, we'll have recordings of the 2 meetings on the website probably later here next week. And then also, as Katie mentioned, we're doing a couple different surveys that just really kind of kicked off here in the last a week or so. One's a text-based survey, and you'll have a chance to rank the goals for the plan and provide their impact. And then also we have a interactive web map tool that if you have ideas for specific locations in the 5 county areas, such as a idea for a new project, a area of a safety concern, etc., you can actually mark that location on a map online. I mentioned briefly the survey. Again, through the website you can access the survey. It's a fairly short 10-minute survey. Again, very important. The more responses we get, again, the better the plan becomes, the stronger the plan becomes in terms of identifying key priorities. Again, we just kind of kick things off. So as of tonight, we've got about 30 or so responses. We hope to get 100 by the end of this month. Our initial deadline is September 30th, but we'll kind of carry it over through October. So again, please forward the survey if you've taken it already. Please encourage your friends, family, colleagues, if you belong to an organization, your members. So really, having folks take the survey is one of the easiest and best ways for us as a planning team to get input from residents. And then finally, I mentioned the mapping tool. If you go to the website, you'll see a chance to a link. It's called just mapping tool there. And it'll take you again to a interactive map. Peter is going to actually kind of log into the map and show you live how the map works. So I'll let Peter take it away.
Thanks, Stephen. Appreciate it. So I'm here at the Greater Egypt Long Range Transportation Plan website. Find a link to the survey here. And then over here where it says mapping tool, that's the link that Stephen was talking about. So we'll click there. And then just to reiterate a little bit about what he was saying, the main idea of this map is to try to solicit the ideas from the public on different projects that we may want to pursue as part of the plan, or different ideas that might be out there in terms of issues that may be seen. Let's see if I can refresh.
This, we're going to switch real quick. I'm going to share my screen because it is, I was able to get it turned on. So,
Okay.
As Peter was mentioning that, and I think, Peter, if you want to go through the instructions, I'll happily drive the presentation.
Okay, yeah, that would be fine. So the first splash screen here is sort of a synopsis of all the instructions that we're going to go through. So if you forget what I'm saying, you'll have a chance to kind of read it right before you log on. So if you just want to click OK there, Katie. So the map is very similar in the way that it works to Google Maps or Google Earth. So if you've ever used one of those websites, then this will seem somewhat familiar. And so as Katie's sort of panning and zooming around, you can do that very easily by clicking on your mouse with the left click, or using the scroll wheel to kind of zoom in or out. There's also a plus and a minus up at the top left that also allow you to zoom in or zoom out. And then there's also a search bar where you can input your home address, your work address, your friend's address, in order to get to a location that you have an idea. When you find your location and you're ready to give us that idea, we have certain preset categories over there on the right-hand side. These categories were created based on some of the feedback that we got out of the Regional Leaders Roundtable. So the ones that we have preset for you are flooding concerns, potential development, safety concerns, and bicycle or pedestrian ideas. If you have an idea that falls outside of one of these categories, don't worry, we have two other categories for you, just labeled other ideas. So once you're ready to place an idea, you'll click on one of the categories. So Katie's clicked on safety concerns. So if you have an area that you feel like is unsafe, you can click there on the map. You can input your name. That will allow other users to come into the map later and see who put that point there. And then you can give us a description. And then when you hit close there, just like that, that will save everything that you just inputted onto the map. And that will be there for other people to see later, as well as for the project team to see once we are developing our project list. So it looks like, based on our meeting earlier today at noon, we do have a couple, or quite a few rather, points, safety concerns, as well as some other ideas on here in the blue. So that's great to see. Share it with your friends and input as many project ideas as you can come up with. That way we have the biggest set of projects that we can choose from when we get to later stages where we start to prioritize these projects.
Also, if you're interested, you can scroll over. Unfortunately, because I am an owner of this website, I'm losing certain capabilities. However, as a user, you can scroll over these sites, click on the points, and see what your friends or neighbors had to say. You can add lines to theirs. You can build on what other people's ideas were, or if you also agree, you can put a second point in the same location to emphasize that the problem is affecting more than one person. So wanted to give you guys an idea of what this looks like. We do ask, just real quick, we will not be submitting any projects for the hatched out area because SIMPO, this urbanized area, has created its own long-range transportation plan, so our projects will coordinate with it, but we cannot affect any change within this zone with this plan at this time because it is not included in our project. So don't want to get anybody the wrong idea, but we will not be able to address any concerns that exist in SIMPO, but we will share those projects with Josie so that he's aware of any public concerns that may exist. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. We'll finish up with our last bit of information. We've got about 2 minutes to go. If you in the audience have any questions, we're happy to answer those at this time. You can submit them in the Q&A or in the chat box. Before we leave you, though, we do have a couple of things we want to go over as our final goodbye. So just to give you an idea, where do we go from here? Well, we're going to take your feedback, what came through these meetings today. We're also going to take what comes in on the web map as well as what comes in on the public survey. We're going to use that information to help guide our process moving forward. It's going to help us prioritize projects. Those projects which meet your community needs are going to rise to the top. And those that don't necessarily hit the goals or the objectives that you're hoping to achieve are going to naturally fall lower in the list as a lower priority. After we leave you here, we're going to start identifying transportation projects and start to look at the future and evaluate some new scenarios, things that may be growth in different areas, or we may be looking at new technology or new types of transportation coming online, or new ways that people want to get around. We're going to, in addition to gathering ideas from you through the web map, we are doing a call for projects for our local government agencies. So those airports, park districts, local governments, county governments, we're all going to be asking them for asking that they submit their ideas for what projects they'd like to see. Combine those projects together to create that prioritized list so that as one voice, these 200,000 people living in the greater Egypt area can turn around to the state and say, this is what we want to have achieved. And finally, by the end of this, we'll be doing some financial analysis just to make sure that we know how much these elements are going to cost and how you can start to prioritize local funding to make them happen. We do invite you at any point in time. You are welcome to, we'll go to that last slide. We want to thank you for joining us tonight. We know that your time is precious and we appreciate you spending it with us. If at any time you have any questions, you can contact Dustin or I. Our emails there are listed on the screen. You can also go to the greateregypttransportationplan.com or .org. We have both websites. And you can submit questions there or contact our team through those resources. We want to thank you once again for joining us and participating. You'll be able to find the survey, the web mapping, and then the recordings of these meetings all on the website. If you have any questions, please reach out to us. We are happy to answer those. And we once again just want to thank you for being with us tonight. Thank you for being active members of your community, and we look forward to bringing this, seeing you again in the spring when we want to go over the project list with you. So thank you again for your time. Any other questions or comments from the project team before we go?
Katie, I was looking at the map a little bit, and a lot of good comments there in the comment area where folks have put projects down that you said you couldn't see. So those are there, and a lot of good input there. So
great. You guys are wonderful, and we want to thank you again. We'll see you next time, and have a good night.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.